are 4 distinctly different flavors of fear. There is the most basic level of fear, which is uncomplicated fear. The core message of fear is pay attention. The second flavor is escalated fear. That's the third level of fear, is flooding. But the fourth level of fear doesn't have to do with practice. It has to do with programming.
Most CEOs are under imposter syndrome. Is that assumption correct? They are first-time CEOs?
Yes. What varies from one person to the next is how strong the imposter syndrome is in them.
Named America's integrity expert by Radio TV Interview Report and featured over 20 times in Forbes and Entrepreneur, Dr. David Gruder has authored over 30 books and is widely known for helping leaders resolve hidden human and organizational dynamics that silently undermine effectiveness.
Lighting torches of freedom!
An originator of civilizational operating architecture and 12 times award-winning clinical and organizational development psychologist with over 4 decades in industry, he has advised executives, leadership teams, and international organizations including American Express and ambassadors of World Trade Organization on aligning leadership, culture, and strategy to strengthen performance. How to be prepared to handle board expectations?
CEOs have to set themselves up to succeed with the board. So we have a board that needs to learn how to behave like a board, and we have to have a CEO that knows how to behave with the board, so that there is alignment between the CEO's approach and the board's values.
How to stop such thoughts that are keep coming and biting us and holding us back?
There are a number of different levels of how I can respond, but let me start with something that's more boots on the ground.
Welcome, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You have helped leaders. You have helped board members, executives, and your education, your experience, your personal life, all are inspiring on each dimension. I want to talk about the common challenges that today's leadership is facing. Technology is changing the whole world. The high-performing CEOs are under imposter syndrome. Personal branding is more important than ever. Whether you are selling yourself or a business or a product, if you cannot sell yourself, nobody will buy your product either. Everything is so important and so fast that people are in hesitation to go out in public. Not everyone is designed by nature to be in public. Public speaking is a top tool to be in front of public, and most people fear of that. And there are psychological challenges. How to get out. Unstructured planning. You've been working with a lot of leaders in your experience, helping them succeed. What do you think people should be careful about and the best practices to follow? And how can everyone come over this and be successful?
This goes back to when I was 16 or 17 years old. I grew up performing vocally, instrumentally, on stage during musicals and acting, things like that. And there came a day when I was composing music and sat down at a piano with a very close friend of mine at the time when I was in high school to start to play a piece of music that I had composed. I sit down at the piano, at the keyboard, my hands are resting on top of the keys, and they literally start shaking. Now, I had never had stage fright in all of my years of performing, and I started performing solo work in 5th grade. And I couldn't believe my hands were shaking. And I just got up from the piano and I said to my friend Ed, I can't do it. And I walked out of the room.
Wow.
And it really shook me up because I didn't expect that. And it took me a little while to finally figure out why that reaction happened. It was only one person, it was a close friend. I was a seasoned performer. Well, it was because I discovered that when I was performing someone else's work, someone else's piece of music, things like that, or someone else's play, if you didn't like my performance, it would sting, it would hurt. But my music that I had composed came from the deepest places inside me, a place of authenticity that was really beyond words, even. And if you didn't like that, I was toast. It alerted me to how deep my shame was that caused me to be terrified to expose myself.
That's interesting. Then how did you overcome that?
I overcame it by forcing myself
Okay.
to play my own music in front of people. But I only started doing that after I came to recognize that I carried more shame about the essence of who I was than I thought that I had carried. So I knew my self-esteem in high school was pretty low, but this really drove it home. And this ties into the kind of performance anxiety and imposter syndrome that you were just referring to, because it's one thing if we are playing a role. That can reduce some anxiety, but what it elevates is a different type of anxiety, which is if I'm playing a role rather than being who I am, then I'm an imposter. I'm pretending to be something I'm not. So then I get to be anxious about that. But if I'm fully exposed, if I'm fully vulnerable, if I'm fully transparent, then I get to be afraid of what if you don't like the essence of me that I'm conveying? So it's like a rock and a hard place between two forms of anxiety.
Everyone doubts themselves. And I think that's the self-judgment is another sort of hesitation that we don't go out and experiment ourselves. And that's what we are ready to do in our product. We do experiment, see how it works. If it doesn't, change it. Change the way we do, change the system we work on, make the product successful. We are our own products, but we hesitate to do experiments on ourselves.
And why would we be hesitant to experiment in front of other people? Because we've been criticized, we've been shamed, we've been shunned, we've been ignored. We come by our reluctance honestly. We come by our programming to present the public self that we think people need us to look like and act like and talk like. And we developed this as part of a childhood survival plan.
Most stories that I hear from people laying back, not going in front line to show off, have some sort of story that are making them stay behind.
Yes.
All of them, some childhood stories, some trauma, some violence, or some sort of thing, or judgment fright.
Yeah.
Right? Self-judgment comes first, and then external judgment, fear. On the stage, sometimes I do feel also that, do I look right? Am I speaking okay? What if I screw up? And things like that actually makes me screw up.
Sure.
I just keep doing it. I don't know how to fix that forever, but it just comes back and back. I cannot control, I cannot stop it from coming back to me. What is your practice? What is your framework that you can suggest today to our audience, that how to stop such thoughts that are keep coming and biting us and holding us back?
There are a number of different levels of how I can respond, but let me start with something that's more boots on the ground. So the first step is for us to recognize that we have an inner critic, that we came by it honestly. We developed that part of ourselves for important survival reasons, so we don't have to criticize ourselves for having an inner critic. To normalize that, to breathe into, okay, yes, inner critics exist. I'm not alone. It's universal. I have an inner critic. So does virtually everybody else. And I developed it for important reasons, even though it no longer serves me. That's the first step. And through that, we're able to recognize when our inner critic is active without going into a shame spiral. Oh, that's my inner critic's message coming in. So we recognize when our inner critic is active. And then from there, what we do is we remind ourselves that our inner critic is a flawed advisor, not the final authority.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we're telling our inner critic that, because our inner critic is as smart as us. So if we get into an arm wrestling match with our inner critic over,
Right.
the best we can hope for is a draw.
Correct.
So it's not about us telling our inner critic.
So we are separating ourselves from another character who's inside us
Yes,
and just make him sleep again.
I am the sovereign. I am the person that's in charge of me, and I have a community of parts inside me. And one of
Okay.
those parts is my critic.
That's a very different way to look at ourselves.
I
And
view
that
us as being communities of self. I
true.
have an inner child, I have an inner teenager, I have
Yeah.
an inner critic.
Yeah, we have all those different personas inside us. I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I
Sure.
have my childhood stories. I have my as son stories also.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, friends,
Of-
and
yeah.
there are different situations and different challenges or different happiness at all
Yes.
points. Your suggestion is identify your inner critic, give it a name, and separate it off.
Step one is recognizing when our critic is active inside us without shaming ourselves because we remember that we came by it honestly.
Mhm.
Step two is reminding ourselves that our inner critic is a flawed advisor, not the final authority. Step three is really where the rubber meets the road because trying to put our critic to sleep doesn't work because if we try to do that, it's going to wake up at very unopportune moments.
Hmm.
Trying to kill our inner critic, which is what some people try to do, well, we can't kill off parts of us. They're just undeveloped parts of us. So it's about growing up our inner critic. Our inner critic doesn't hook us any more than other people's criticisms of us hook us unless there's a grain of truth in the message.
Hmm.
You've probably, just as I have, and just as our audience has, there have been times when we've been criticized in ways that have that no connection to us, where it's so clear they're talking about themselves or a prior
Yeah.
experience, and it just rolls off our back. But
True.
when there's a grain of truth in their criticism, it goes straight in like a dagger.
Yeah.
Third step is recognizing that there's a grain of truth in our inner critic's message and identifying what that grain of truth is, and then bringing that to whatever our version of higher resource is, higher self, God, angels, spirit guides, highest love and wisdom, bringing it to that awareness in us and asking what that grain of truth looks like through those.
So believe yourself.
To believe that there is inside us a source of input that's much more developed than our inner critic,
Uh-huh.
that isn't a flawed advisor.
I practice some sort of gratitude like this. Sometimes what happens is when I'm telling myself I'm in control, because I'm not in control, I try to help myself to get back in control, but I also feel like it is a lie.
Well, the lie is that you're out of control in the first place.
I'm in control, but actually I'm not in control. Then how does it?
When we've learned not to be our authentic self, we don't feel in control. What's in control is the programming that says I'm supposed to look and act and talk and presence myself in a particular way.
Hmm.
That's a mask. That's a persona. That's a partly false self. It's a self that's a combination of aspects of us that we learned were okay for us to express and things that we've learned to pretend we are, that we learned we needed to act like or speak like in order to be acceptable.
So what you're saying is have to practice that. Eventually you'll get it. Your inner critic will understand that. Yourself will understand that. Eventually that internal fright will start to go away.
That's the fourth step in the process with our inner critic,
Okay.
is retraining our inner critic to be an inner helper. Because what an inner critic is a child's version of a
Hmm.
rules keeper.
Uh-huh.
It's a child's version. that got so deeply embedded in us that we think it's who we are rather than how we survived.
Right.
But this part of us was meant to grow up into something that is incredibly helpful to us, which is the part of us that preserves stability, predictability, organization, and standards. Not through shame, not through getting us anxious and worried and shutting us down, but to preserve a level of stability that enables our creativity to come out. And that is our inner steward. That's the archetypal name for this part of us, is the steward. It's not the
Yeah.
king or the queen. It's not the
Right.
sovereign.
Steward.
It's a steward. It's a preserver of stability, predictability, organization, and standards that allow our creativity to express in useful ways.
It sounds very easy, but also sounds like it works.
It's easy to articulate.
Hmm.
It's not easy to implement because it requires practice. And practicing makes it work.
Practice makes the man perfect. That's an old
Practice
saying.
makes progress. It doesn't make perfection. Practice makes progress. Tell me about your most dazzling leadership failures and your most inspiring leadership successes. Someone's a mentor, they've got that available to them. There are skills involved in leadership. And so the ideal mentor is someone who can help us develop missing skills, missing capacities for leadership.
Most CEOs are under imposter syndrome. They're struggling to perform.
Yes.
They're struggling to deliver. Is that assumption correct? They are first-time CEOs?
Yes, it is,
Okay.
in my experience, quite correct. What varies from one person to the next is how strong the imposter syndrome is in them.
How to pick a mentor, how to spot which mentor is right.
Let me give you general guidelines. First of all, the mentor has to have been in leadership roles successfully.
Any other story from leadership side, like leaders with imposter syndrome?
I want to illuminate two parts to imposter syndrome. The first part is what used to be called
Any personal experience from your life that you were in fear, doubting your abilities, and still went out in the world and made it and killed it, or at least satisfied that you did it and you did it right?
So as a child and a teenager growing up as a performer, I learned through trial and error that there was an optimal sweet spot for me to be in internally when I was performing. And the word for it is, I didn't invent it, this is what's used in performing. It's called butterflies.
Uh-huh.
It's a level of anxiety inside
Yeah.
that's not out of control. It's not overwhelming. It doesn't shut me down.
Some tingling inside.
A tingling inside that enables me to be in peak performance mode. If I don't have butterflies at all, then my performance is flat.
Is it adrenaline?
It is the edges of adrenaline. It's the beginning of adrenaline rather
Okay.
than adrenaline overload,
I see.
which is technically called flooding, where the adrenaline floods the brain. This is just the edges of adrenaline. So
Okay.
I learned that there was this sweet spot, and that helped me embrace my butterflies rather than try to resist them. Because when I would try to resist butterflies, it would make them worse. It would
Right.
increase my anxiety. That's the first part. The experience that I had that helped me take a next step in my own healing with all of this anxiety kind of stuff was many years ago when I sat for my psychologist licensing exam. And I walk into this room for an exam where there are a couple of hundred people taking the exam. And this was in September of 1985. I walked in knowing that I was almost certain to fail the exam. This wasn't my anxiety talking. I didn't want to take the exam because I was burnt out from graduate school. So I was delaying it. And I finally decided the only way I'm going to light a fire under me would be to go into the exam knowing that I was going to flunk, so that I would then get motivated to get back into studying and preparation. I had taken a review course, and following that, I was taking practice exams and flunking all of them royally. So
Everyone does.
that's how I walked into the exam. And I'm sitting in the exam room, and the anxiety of everyone around me, you could cut the anxiety with a knife. It was huge. And I'm thinking, oh, this is really a dysfunctional atmosphere. And I'm also getting into judgment like, these are people who are becoming psychologists and they can't manage their own anxiety. So I went into a whole outer critic
True.
blame trip on
True.
that.
Yeah, that's interesting critic.
That was my inner critic
Uh-huh.
expressing outwardly toward other people, or judging toward other people silently and inwardly. I thought, well, what am I going to do about this? And what came into me from the part of me that was emerging into a healthy steward instead of staying stuck in a child's version of an inner critic was, you have one job, David: to come out of this exam having had a good time. And when that message came through me, I was kind of stunned. I didn't know that that was coming. And my first reaction was, really? But I thought, well, I flunked all these practice exams. I've
Yeah.
got nothing to lose. So I committed to that objective, to come out of the exam room at the end of the exam having had a good time. And so that's what I focused on throughout the exam. And I did leave the exam room having had a good time. Almost certain that I had flunked, but at least I had had a good time. Ultimately, the exam results come back, and not only have I passed the exam, I've passed it by 2 standard deviations, which, for those who don't know what that means, I passed at a level that was significantly over the passing grade.
Wow.
And I know that was because I had a good time, because in having a good time, I didn't have dysfunctional levels of anxiety.
I heard that term before also, power of belief. Your belief drives your life. What you see, you like or not, it is your belief. That thing is not different.
Yes.
It is your belief on that thing.
But the belief you're talking about is the belief that our programming believes. Because a lot of us
But you
have
reprogrammed
moments,
yourself
yeah,
right there.
but a lot of us have these moments where we know better,
Yeah.
but we can't act better.
Yeah,
That's
right.
not a belief. That's a want to believe.
No, that's a great story. I mean, you are carrying PhD for over 40 years now. That's amazing.
I got my PhD in 1982.
How many psychologists were there at that time?
In the exam room, there were about a
Yeah.
couple of hundred,
Couple hundreds.
between 100 and
And
200.
how many passed? You have some percentage?
At that time, the passing rate for people taking the exam for the first time was about 40%.
Amazing.
More people failed the exam the first time than passed it, and I was taking it for the first time.
Any other story from leadership side, like leaders with imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
stage fright, and how they overcome that? How did you help? And like, what does everyone should do to just be successful on public speaking, on leadership roles, on executive decision making perspectives? I mean, there are a lot of things that we can be successful once we control ourselves.
I want to illuminate 2 parts to imposter syndrome. The first part is what used to be called, it still is, but it's not a term that's used as often as it used to be, the Peter principle.
Mhm.
And the Peter principle is where people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence.
Okay.
The people who are doing the promoting see some potential in the person that they're going to promote. They then promote them, put them in a new role, give them no training to embody that role in a good way. So it's a setup for imposter syndrome, because now I'm in this new role and I know I'm not prepared for it. Somebody saw some potential in me, but then they just threw me into the deep end of the pool. That's one dimension that feeds into imposter syndrome. It's simply lack of training. And the solution to that part of imposter syndrome is to develop the capacities that are necessary for effective, authentic, integrous relationship, which frankly, not even programs like the Harvard Business School Leadership Program prepare people enough in, because they ignore the psychological dimensions of this.
I read an article about majority of CEOs are under imposter syndrome. They're struggling to deliver, struggling to perform. Is my assumption correct from your perspective that they are first-time CEOs? And they are in the second category, that they are promoted before they were prepared.
Yes.
Right. So how to be prepared for such big roles? Everyone wants to be CEO, and if proposed by board, people will jump on it before realizing they're not prepared for it. It's hard to refuse a responsibility this big. But how to be prepared for that then? I mean, it is true for all other positions as well, not just CEO, but everyone wants to grow, right? So in that perspective, if I'm not ready, then how to be ready beforehand?
So there's a proactive approach and a retroactive approach. The proactive is I'm developing my leadership capacities before I'm promoted. Retroactive is I've been thrown into this new role,
Yeah.
and now I've got to catch up.
I'm more interested to hear about catch-up situation here.
In catch up, the first thing that's crucial is to recognize that I came by my lack of leadership skills honestly. I haven't had until now a need to develop certain capacities. And so, on a practical level, what a leader owes it to themselves and to the people they're leading to do is to identify what leadership growth edges are the most important for them to focus on first and second, third, and next, and to overcome something else, which is the isolation. Because a lot of people who become entrepreneurs and become leaders, they are used to experiencing that they do a whole bunch of things better than the people around them. And so they've learned to not rely on other people, which means that a lot of leaders don't have sufficient mentorship. They don't select a mentor. And in a corporation that is functioning in a good way, they actually are given a budget to have a mentor.
This is the thing I was coming actually for my next topic about mentorship. So yeah, it's good you are already talking. So what about mentoring? So if they have a budget for mentoring, that's good. What if they don't? Then people can hire mentor themselves. Everyone needs a mentor to grow.
Yes.
Industry moves faster than our knowledge.
And also because there are things we don't know about our impact that others see more clearly about us than we see about us. Word input is so important.
How to pick a mentor, because mentorship is available. How to spot which mentor is right?
In part, it depends on what the leadership growth edges are. So you want to make sure that you select a mentor who has those leadership growth edges. But let me give you general guidelines. First of all, the mentor has to have been in leadership roles successfully. They shouldn't be someone who just teaches about leadership without having occupied leadership roles. Second part is that the best mentors are mentors who have both failed at leadership and succeeded at leadership. So they can offer the alerts about blind spots, and they can also offer the enrichment about what success.
Mentors in market usually don't promote their failures. So we don't know that. Yeah, when you interview, at least to hire somebody, then you can ask some questions. Okay, here are the situations that I can go wrong in. And if you have similar experiences, yeah, that can be a relevant story to pick one.
Tell me about your most dazzling leadership failures and your most inspiring leadership successes. If
Okay.
someone's a mentor, they've got that available to them. There are skills involved in leadership. And so the ideal mentor is someone who can help us develop missing skills, missing capacities for leadership. But the other part of an ideal leadership mentor is someone with enough psychological wisdom to help the leader uncover and clear away the baggage that they carry that interferes with them being a leader.
All right, so have a mentor, resonate your possibilities of both being successful and being failure. Ask those questions to hire a mentor and then decide accordingly.
Yes,
That's a good way, actually. I mean, this is how even hiring managers hire staff for them.
exactly.
It's exactly the same
It
practice.
shouldn't be any different.
It shouldn't be any different. Yeah, and this is like highly useful. I mean, these mentors actually can make your career bigger. Yeah, this is good.
Boards don't get trained in how to function as boards. So people get appointed to boards because they're big stockholders in the company. The problem from the CEO end is that CEOs aren't taught how to go into an interview, being interviewed by the board before they're even hired.
To be successful with board, if you have to, change the baseline expectation as well with their consent.
The CEO's responsibility is not to tell the board what decisions the board needs to make, but the CEO's responsibility is to inform the board about what the consequences of a decision they're considering making, because they're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the company.
What fear is, and how to address that right on the spot.
There are 4 distinctly different flavors of fear. The most basic level of fear, which is uncomplicated fear, the core message of fear is pay attention. There's something here to pay attention to.
Now we understand like how to overcome this imposter syndrome, fill the gap, identify problems, and working with mentor is super helpful to grow up, overcome your weaknesses, fix those. There are other problems also to show results. Business is going, team is growing, budget is there. CEOs has to deliver results. Of course, that is one of the reasons behind imposter syndrome, because they were not prepared for it. Let's assume they are prepared, but now it's time to perform and show results. And they are answerable to their bosses, which is board. And from your experience working with board members, what do they look for other than growth, profits? What do they look for updates from CEOs, from C-suite, and like what are those challenges that they face in the communication gap between CEO and board, and how to be prepared to handle board expectations?
The problem is in both directions. The problem there is with board members and with the CEO, who then might bring in other executives in the C-suite to board meetings as needed. But primarily, it's a problem with the CEO and with the board members. The problem from a board member point of view has to do with my motivation as a board member. Am I motivated only to maximize growth and profits? Am I motivated to make sure that we have a company that's being profitable, doing good in the world, or is it just profits? I don't care, how much good or not good is being done. Am I motivated by wanting to make sure that the company culture is nourishing and growth oriented and productive and collaborative among the staff, the team, the employees, the executives, the managers? Or do I only care about increasing my stock value? Board member expectations are really important. Second thing that I've seen over and over again with board members is that boards don't get trained in how to function as boards. So people get appointed to boards because they're big stockholders in the company, or because they are excited about the company's mission and have some expertise in some area of business or fundraising or whatever it might happen to be, but they don't necessarily have experience being board members. so they don't know how to function as a board. So that's a problem from the board end. The problem from the CEO end is that CEOs aren't taught how to go into an interview, being interviewed by the board before they're even hired, with a mindset that says, I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing.
Okay.
Is this a board that I'm willing to be beholden to? Or is their agenda incompatible with my way of leading and my vision of what a healthy company is? Unless there is a good match between the CEO's vision and the board's values, big problems right from the get-go. Now, assuming that that all works out, that the CEO or the prospective CEO has done a good job of interviewing the board to make sure that it's a right match for them, then what we have to make sure of is that the board sets standards, sets KPIs or
Yeah.
whatever other that they're
Dashboards.
going to be evaluating, that they set the right metrics in the right time frame so that it's not a setup for failure. And if a CEO is going to stay silent when a board starts setting up those metrics, where the metrics are inappropriately selected or inflated beyond what's realistic, that's a CEO that's in trouble. CEO has to be prepared to say to the board, let's look at what you have in mind more closely, because the impact of what you all are proposing as the metrics is going to backfire, and here's why it's going to backfire and how it's going to backfire. Let's revisit those metrics. CEOs have to set themselves up to succeed with the board.
Right.
So we have a board that needs to learn how to behave like a board, and we have to have a CEO that knows how to behave with the board so that there is alignment between the CEO's approach and the board's values.
So that also includes the fear factor here. To be successful with board, if you have to change the baseline expectation as well with their consent.
The CEO's responsibility is not to tell the board what decisions the board needs to make, but the CEO's responsibility is to inform the board about what the consequences of a decision they're considering making will be that they might not be able to evaluate, either because they're not experienced board members sometimes,
Yeah.
but more often because they're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. And the CEO has to be prepared to educate the board about the implications of the things that the board is considering based on what the CEO knows about the day-to-day operations.
That's a great insight. I mean, I'm sure some are smart enough to sense this and doing it already. But since we started with imposter syndrome about 6 years, and this is like one of these big reasons that is a buzz behind it. I just touched the fear factor. And that brings me to another conversation, which is also true about leadership, but in fact, with everybody, all of us. We have fear for something, okay? Like stage fright, we touched also in our conversation. How to sense the intensity of fear? We just try to understand based on what we have experienced so far. Is there a category of fear? Is there a category wise response management without fear? Because we just drain into symptoms and try to address that based on our best judgment or best experience, or sometimes we don't know the right way to handle the fear. How to sense the fear other than the basic symptom of fear, anxiety? Can you just talk about like, okay, what fear is, yeah, and how to address that right on the spot? I mean, not just over the period of 10 days practice. The fear is right there.
Yes.
How to quickly express it.
The way to do that is to already know that there are 4 distinctly different flavors of fear. And most people don't know this. There is the most basic level of fear, which is uncomplicated fear. They think about what the core message of fear is. The core message of fear is pay attention. There's something here to pay attention to. The only reason we have fear is because we think there's something that we don't know how to pay attention to or that we don't see, and therefore we have to brace ourselves.
What do you mean?
Fear, the foundation of fear is I can't handle it.
I think that's the easier definition what I was going to say.
But what I'm underneath that people don't understand is that the reason that there is that fear is because we're trying to alert ourselves that there's something for us to pay attention to that we haven't been paying attention to. And if we just simply, when we notice the edges of fear, just the mildest level of anxiety, the intervention is simply asking ourselves, what is it that my deforesta is trying to alert me to pay attention to? That's simple fear. That's the first of 4 flavors of fear. Okay. If we ignore that, then what happens is that our fear doesn't go away. We might bury it alive for a little while, but then it's going to rear its ugly head again anyway. So what happens is that fear starts to escalate. It increases in its intensity.
And that is where the flight and fight.
Not quite.
Is that
Not
where?
there yet. That's the third flavor.
Okay.
The second flavor is escalating fear. It's where we didn't pay attention to the wake-up call that fear issues, which is there's something here to pay attention to. Because if I don't figure out what there is to pay attention to and pay attention to it, then I'm at risk. If I can pull a Mr. Rogers, fear is our afraid. Simple fear. Now, where fear starts getting complicated is when we ignore it and starts increasing in its intensity. When it's increasing in its intensity, the intervention with ourselves is to recognize that our fear is escalating and to do a U-turn back to what did I ignore? What did I think I could get away with not paying attention to, which I clearly can't get away with because my fear is increasing.
So that is where flight or fright comes in.
Fight and flight comes in with the third level of fear. If we don't do the U-turn, when our fear is escalating, if we don't do the U-turn back into learning mode, what's my fear trying to work? Okay, then our fear continues to escalate until the amount of stress chemicals that our body is producing because of fear, norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, go shooting straight to the brain. Okay. And they literally flood the brain with those stress chemicals. And that state is called flooding because the brain is flooded.
And how long it takes to get the stress or fear level from stage 1 to 3? How fast it is?
It depends on whether someone's carrying the 4th level of fear. So let me get there in a moment. Okay. When our brain is flooded with stress chemicals, the impact that has is when it turns off the thinking part of our brain and turns on the survival, the reptile part of our brain, the limbic system. When we are flooded with stress chemicals, we have a very limited repertoire of ways that we can deal with that. We can go into fight mode. We can go into flight mode. We can run away. We can go into freeze mode. That's deer in the headlights. And we can go into faint mode, which is playing possum, hoping that, playing dead, hoping that the threat will pass.
I only knew 2 of them.
And there's one more, which is fawn. Fawning is where we cater to someone else. We tell them what we think they want to hear or what we know they want to hear, even when it's not true. We give in, we cave in, or we cater to that. Ourselves. We prostitute ourselves. We're bribing. It's a form of bribery. We're trying to bribe them and to stop being a threat and to stop being a threat. So there's fight, flight, freeze, faint, and fawn. That's the total repertoire. Most of us don't know that.
There are 5 levels.
Most Psychologists and mental health professionals don't even know this. They're shocked when I train them at these things. They say to me, "Why didn't we learn this in grad school?" My answer is, well, we didn't learn it in grad school because our professors didn't know it either.
It's a good one.
That's the third level of fear, is flooding. What that requires is a timeout. Because if we try to think our way out of things when our thinking part of our brain has been turned off by the stress chemicals, we're fighting our way out of a paper bag. It takes, in ordinary people, it takes between 15 and 20 minutes for those stress chemicals to reabsorb, to come back out of the brain and get reabsorbed.
Okay.
Only when those stress chemicals leave the brain can our thinking process come back online. So like the intervention with flooded fear is a timeout.
So how to trigger the timeout?
By learning to recognize ahead of time what my symptoms are that tell me that I'm flooding, so that I can then be on the lookout for those symptoms in here and now moments. If I don't know beforehand what symptoms to look for, I'm sunk.
So it's coming down to again practice.
Yes.
First of all, acknowledge all these names, your symptoms with these definitions, and then practice to the conduct. It comes down to again same practice we started with.
Yes, practice. All of that's practice stuff. But the fourth level of fear doesn't have to do with practice. It has to do with the program. This is where that people are carrying so much unresolved baggage around prior traumas, for prior fear situations that never got worked through, that in a here and now situation, they go from calm to beyond flooded like that. So it feels like it's instantaneous. When it's instantaneous like that, it is a surefire clue that we have prior unresolved baggage that's gotten reactivated in the here and now by a here and now situation.
Here and now.
Right. It's getting reactivated in the here and now, but what the it is that's getting reactivated is our unresolved trauma from prior fears. So Josh, tool is basically you identify your objective and then you look at what could get in the way of that objective, is what readers aren't trained to apply to themselves.
How can it be revered then? It's a polluted environment.
When a company has appropriate KPIs and those KPIs are not being met, or the KPIs are being met or even exceeded with turnover rates that are unacceptable, those are the clues that there are people who are underfunctioning or overfunctioning in leadership roles.
How to detect it, the culture issue based on individuals, and fix that. Because people are leaving, what is the right way to address that?
Leaders who are not walking their talk, they're just talking their talk, they're living out of the old model, which is do as I say, not as I am, doesn't cut it anymore. The younger generations will not and do not tolerate that.
We all have bad memories at some sort, small or big, but yeah, so those are causing these case levels. Okay.
And that requires deeper inner healing work. That's not something that anybody thinks their way out of. They've got to be helped by their mentor, occasionally by a psychotherapist, to heal the wounds, to heal the trauma, so that there's nothing to get reactivated in the present.
How to identify a case symptom?
There are two surefire ways. One is if you go from calm to out of control with fear in a split second. Okay, that's one. Rather than gradual escalation, that's one symptom. The other symptom is if we start hearing ourselves saying to ourselves, "This person's behaved just like so and so from
Also, immediate anger, immediate like mood swing.
Yeah, where they're starting to become aware that they're in a flashback, that they're projecting onto the current situation or the current person something that didn't go well for them in a past similar situation or with a past similar person."
So people who get angry so fast, so frequently, and have this symptom.
This is called recycling fear, or you brought in anger. It's recycling anger. It just keeps repeating on itself until we clear out the unresolved trauma, I call it undigested life experience. So the point where we've harvested gifts from that undigested life experience so it no longer can harm us in the present.
Sure. That's very interesting. We all have fears of some sort.
Yeah.
And there are levels of it. There are different reasons for all that. We don't know.
And frankly, most leadership mentors don't know how to help people at that level.
Is there any practice that you want to suggest to overcome this fear levels? Is there some basic tools or some practice that can help us?
Right. Well, I've offered one having to do with the 4 steps of dealing with our career. I've offered another which has to do with being able to recognize that there are 4 distinct varieties of fear so that we can spot when we're in which variety so we know how to intervene effective, what the intervention style is, because each of those 4 forms of fear require a different intervention. A lot of people who go into leadership roles for a combination of noble desires. They want to make a positive difference. Plus redemption plan, an ego's version of a redemption plan. I'm insufficient, I'm inadequate, and now I have to prove myself in order to finally decide or accept that I'm lovable and acceptable just as I am. This ego redemption script most leaders carry alongside of their noble intentions for being leader, having to do with wanting to make positive. Leaders who don't recognize and are helped by their mentor to free themselves from their ego's redemption plan that also motivates them into leadership become dangerous leaders, I think. And that accounts for about 90% of leaders of my experience. They've never touched their ego's redemption plan. They don't even know that such a thing exists.
Yeah, they don't want to admit that they have that.
And they select mentors who aren't sophisticated enough to be able to recognize that when it's happening in a leader and help that leader outgrow that redemption plan. They select leadership mentors who are themselves blind about those things.
So they work with mentors where they are convenient to work with.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway? What are those tools that individuals can acknowledge, understand, and help themselves?
People have even before they become executives. They develop them when they're in managerial positions. And the tool is basically you identify your objective, make sure the objective is in alignment with the long-term intentions or goals. You identify your objective and then you look at what could get in the way of that objective. Are there missing resources that are needed? Is there staff development that's needed in order to meet that objective? Are there tactics that need to be selected, or is there software or AI that needs to be selected as part of helping to accomplish an objective? Well, that basic mindset is what leaders aren't trained to apply to themselves.
Yeah.
When a leader understands all of that, then they just apply those principles to their own leadership development journey.
True.
And when we do that, then we don't make ourselves wrong for having gaps. Of course, we have gaps in our leadership edges.
Everyone has.
Everyone has. It's human. And if we carry shame, we can't be self-accepting about the existence of our gaps.
Right.
And then we either try to avoid addressing the gaps or we go into shame over them. Everyone has gaps.
Everyone has gaps.
Let's make that normal so that we can get fully aware of where our gaps are and which of those gaps needs to be attended to first and next in sequence of our leadership development journey.
That's amazing. It's simple.
Yes. But you know how many leadership mentors don't even understand this? Yeah, it's shocking.
We complicate things for no reason.
The 2 things that are left that I think would be valuable to include, one has to do with leaders who overfunction and underfunction. because overfunctioning and underfunctioning isn't talked about enough. And the other is leaders who over-identify with being leaders. So underfunction and overfunction is one. Then over-identification is the other. Underfunctioners let people get away with shit that they should never let people get away with.
That was a good way to understand and resolve the over fear issues. Because now we understand the fear factor, how to acknowledge it, what tools we can use to address that. I wouldn't say we can fix it, but at least we can work around to start living with this and handle that well. I also have seen this is not just CEO's problem. It is happening at all levels, at professional and personal end. I read an article long ago, and that still stands true. People do not resign because of the company's brand, because of their salary, because of their growth. Most of the times, people leave because of polluted environment, bad bosses, no strategy, no growth map. What do you think about like the root cause is? I mean, immediate boss could be a mid manager or the top exec in the organization. It depends on who's leaving, who's resigning. But reference is still the same, bad boss, right? What is your take about this? Like why those bosses are bad and why some are not bad, how they can realize like they are making losses to the company, they are doing bad for the company. What is your take about it? What is that observation right? First of all, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
If you do, then let's talk about it. I want to hear your perspective and opinion on this, like, and how leaders can fix it.
Well, we'll zoom in on that part of it because the issue of leaders being seen as bad or as dysfunctional is a big reason for quitting. So
Mhm.
let's just focus on that part. And what I've seen is that quote unquote bad takes two very different, almost opposite forms. And the technical term for each of them is overfunctioning and underfunctioning. So an overfunctioning leader is a leader who micromanages,
That's familiar.
a leader who shames and coerces.
That's familiar too.
So that's overfunction. When a leader or a manager overfunctions, guess what they're teaching the people around them to do?
They're setting bad examples.
And then the leader complains about how their people aren't performing. Well, sure, they're not performing because you're overfunctioning. You're giving them no reason to perform.
Lack of trust.
There's overfunctioning and then there's underfunctioning. And underfunctioning leaders are the kinds of leaders who hide behind the importance of empathy as an excuse for ignoring accountability. Empathy is important because that's part of emotional safety. But an underfunctioning leader refuses to make executive decisions when decisions need to be made. An underfunctioning leader hides behind empathy as a way of, as I said before, not making people accountable.
Right.
Missing accountability mechanisms are rampant, where they're either absent or it gets called accountability, but what it really is shaming and punishment, not authentic accountability. So underfunctioning and overfunctioning leaders drive good people out of their companies.
But they don't want to realize that it's their fault.
Right. Because if they're suffering from imposter syndrome, to come full circle, if they admit that they have a role in the problem, it's going to activate the shame that they have or the guilt that they have about not being good enough, which is the heart of imposter syndrome.
Who's responsible to fix it? How to sense it? How to detect it? The culture issue based on individuals and fix that, because people are leaving. I mean, what is the right way to address that?
As you and I know, there's a trickle-down effect. So how the CEO behaves trickles down to how the executive team behaves. How the executive team behaves trickles down to how the managers behave, which then
I
trickles
agree
down.
with that.
And so leaders who are not walking their talk, they're just talking their talk, They're living out of the old model, which is do as I say, not as I am,
Uh-huh.
doesn't cut it anymore. The younger generations will not and do not tolerate that.
Yeah,
And they're right to not tolerate.
absolutely. So the reason behind is to make boss happy more than do good for the company.
It's either to make the boss happy or to hide under the radar so
Hmm.
the boss doesn't pay attention to them and their underfunctioning or their lack of productivity or whatever the issue might happen to be.
How can it be revered then? It's a polluted environment.
When a company has appropriate KPIs and those KPIs are not being met, or the KPIs are being met or even exceeded with turnover rates that are unacceptable, those are the clues that there are people who are underfunctioning or overfunctioning in leadership roles.
So KPIs, so numbers speak louder than words. KPIs can signal such failures.
The KPI sets up the underfunctioning, right? Because if the KPI is not realistic, then people are going to go into a mode that in psychology is called learned helplessness, where nothing they do makes a difference.
People actually who are themselves are setting their KPIs, their success KPIs. Nobody else knows what the KPIs should be.
Yes. And how often do the right people get consulted about what the KPIs should be by the people who are actually responsible for setting them?
So engaging with them is necessary as well.
Of course.
So yeah, okay, it makes total sense to me. Yeah, I just want to make it clear for execs, the leaders listening to this today, is like how important is that to engage with your staff to define your success metrics.
Yes, it's vital, because only when that information is held by a top executive is that top executive able to go to the board and say to the board, we have to revisit our KPIs to make them functional and to ensure that the KPIs that are set help the company flourish.
I look at it that way, is like as we measure customer retention rate, alongside results, we should also add employee retention rate.
Exactly.
If results are going up, retention is high, employee retention is high, it tells culture is good as well as like performance.
Yeah.
This is good because I haven't seen employee retention rate KPI as yet.
Yeah, it's a huge oversight.
Great. It is wonderful, David. A lot of good conversations today. Before we wrap up, any big suggestions that you want to give that you live in your life and you want to suggest all of us, the leaders, we should all adopt in our lives?
I'll say it in two different ways. For us as human beings, we live our lives at the level of our wounds, not our wishes. So if we're not on a solid, well-mentored self-development journey, then we're going to continue to change ourselves and the people around us. We're going to continue to function at a lower level than our highest intentions are. So that's at a personal level. At a leadership level, the corollary to that is leaders lead at the level of their self-development limitations despite their highest intentions. And part of good mentorship and training of leaders is to help them do the inner work and the self-development and the skills development and the orchestration development necessary for them to lead at the level of their highest intentions rather than at the level of their self-development limitations.
That's deep but powerful. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. As long as it's adopted well and be honest to yourself. Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for your time today. I learned a lot today. I'm sure everyone is going to learn from this. This is like a great conversation I had with you today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap on this episode. As I look back over our journey so far, I'm struck by something far more significant than our metrics. I'm struck by the caliber of the conversations we have built together. To you, our viewers, thank you. Your time is the most valuable asset you own, and the fact that you choose to spend it here. I do not take it lightly, and I do everything possible in my control to create the value content for you. At this show, we are not interested in winning the race for volume. We are committed to quality over quantity. Our goal is not to fill your feed, but to fuel your perspective. We are building a platform focused on big picture insights that actually move the needle in your life and your career. We are still in our early chapters, and I'm grateful to have you with us as we build something designed to last. Thank you for your trust and your continued support. If you value this perspective and our agenda, I invite you to subscribe and join us in building this mission. Thank you.